Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm so excited to share with you guys tonight some urban legends that I grew up on. I either heard these urban legends from the adults in my family or just from older siblings. I've always liked sharing these stories as a way to just freak people out or scare them, but I feel like they've always been told as just kind of like a warning. So, for the three stories that I'm going to share with you guys today, I try to go with stories that I feel like are a little bit less told or a little bit less known. And one of them is actually more of a personal story that my grandpa actually told us based on some friends of his growing up when he was in high school. So I'm going to save the story from my grandpa for last, but we're going to go ahead and start with the story that's really stuck with me my entire life. And I actually feel like it really did make me be a little bit more cautious when I was driving alone. So the first story is a story of a young girl that was out alone at night, and she had gotten into her car after hanging out with some friends, and she was on her way back home. Her drive home consisted of back roads that are less lit and doesn't have as much traffic, so you don't really pass very many cars as you're going home. Because she was driving home at night, it's a little bit harder to see, and you also can't really see the roads very well because there aren't very many streetlights or anything out on those back roads. So when a car came up behind her and kept flashing its lights at her, she got a little bit freaked out and realized that the car seemed to be following very closely to her. Now, when I'm driving personally and somebody gets really close to me, I start to freak out just a little bit because it's dangerous. If I was to have something jump out in front of me and I slam on my brakes, they could hit me. Or when you're a girl and you're driving alone, it gets a little bit nerve wracking because it starts to feel like the car is actually following you. And so she was a little bit worried that this car was actually following her home. And since it's a back road, there aren't very many turns or anything that you can take to try and lose the car. And so when they kept flashing their lights at her, she did freak out just a little bit and decided to pull off to the side of the road, hoping that the car would just pass her if she was going too slowly. And that's why the car was following so closely to her. But to her surprise, the car actually pulled over behind her, and they got out and asked her to step outside of her car. When they asked her to step outside of her car, they said it was because there was something wrong with her car, and so that's how they got her to exit her car. And when they pulled her out, they explained that the reason they kept flashing their lights at her is because they had seen somebody was in the back seat that had been hiding in the back seat, and they saw their head come up, and every time they flashed their lights at her, the person in the back seat would then sit back down and kind of hide so that they were not in view. And so they kept flashing their lights so that the person would not attack this young woman. And so the lesson that you're learning from this urban legend or scary story that adults would kind of tell you growing up is to always lock your doors and to check your back seat before taking off in your car, especially when you're alone. That one always stuck with me. I've always been super scared of that one. I am the type of person that I will make sure all my doors are locked before I leave. And in doing so, I even locked my keys in my car so many times because I was so like on top of making sure that my car was locked that I would forget that I had set my keys down in the front seat or something when I was grabbing something out of the back seat. I was such a ditz in my teenage years. I don't do this anymore. I'm way more careful of making sure I have my keys in my hand before I lock doors or anything like that. But I was always very cautious to make sure that my doors were locked before I would leave my car, especially if I knew that I was going to be somewhere until after dark. And always, always, always check my back seat. But I am the person that literally just unlocks the driver's door when I'm getting in as a precaution because this story just really stuck with me my entire life and it freaked me out. I don't know if this is a true story. The story is always told as if like it's somebody that a friend of the family knows or it's somebody that, you know, your parents grew up with had this happen to them or something. And so it's always like that really scary story that it seems more personalized, but I feel like everybody has some sort of version that's been told to them. So, moving on to our next story. This story was always told as taking place up in a canyon that was just a few blocks from the home that I actually grew up in. So, I was always kind of scared of a certain area in this canyon called Beer Can Flats. And due to this story, I always kind of assumed that this area was the area in the story. No one ever specifically said that that was the specific place that this story took place in, but I just kind of associated it as being that place. So I never liked to be at Beer Can Flats at nighttime or anywhere near it during nighttime after I heard this story. And so the story kind of just goes that there was this high school couple that had driven up the canyon together, and they parked at Beer Can Flats, and they were just kind of like kissing, what teenagers do in their cars when they go and park somewhere. They heard scratching outside of the car, and they thought that this was strange, but they kind of just assumed it was like some animal, like a squirrel or something, that was crawling on the car or, scraping its claws against the vehicle. So they just kind of ignored it and kept kissing or whatever. And the scratching happened again, and it seemed a little bit louder and more intense this time. And so it kind of frightened them, it ruined the mood. So they decided to hurry and get out of the area. They didn't know what was causing it, if it could be like a mountain lion or something like that. So they took off and made it back into town and stopped at a gas station. And as they stopped at the gas station, they got out and checked the car, and they had seen a hook on the back of their car. And this is the hook, like if you had a hook hand hooked into a car. And so the story always was that there was like some serial killer on the loose that had a hook hand, and they practically escaped this serial killer. And so I think that the reason parents would tell this story to their kids growing up is to try and stop you from getting into some mischief by going up the canyon to make out with your boyfriend or girlfriend. And so I feel like that was kind of the reason that they told that story, but it always seemed really spooky. And then it's always told as if it's somewhere in your town. So then it seems more real because, it happened in your town. It didn't scare me as much as the guy in the back seat story, but it definitely scared me to where I didn't like to go to Beer Can Flats at night. And I didn't really like going up the canyon with anyone at night other than my family. So I guess it did the trick for me. I don't know if it worked for anyone else, but it scared me enough that I didn't get into any mischief up in the canyon. So I can say that it worked for me. Okay, and our third and final story of the night is actually going to be a story that my grandpa had told my mom, and my mom kind of just told us the story a little bit. And it has to do with a Ouija board. And so she would tell us this story whenever we found an interest in kind of purchasing a Ouija board, or we would talk about like playing around with one. And so I feel like this was kind of the story in my family that was like a cautionary tale of why we should not be playing with Ouija boards. So the story goes that when my grandpa was in high school, he had gone to a party at one of his friends' house. So it was him and four of his friends. This was at the time when the Ouija board had just come out, so it was brand new, and everyone was really interested in playing this game. And as we all know, the Ouija board is advertised as being a family game to kind of get the family together and play around with. But we now know that there are more evil tendencies that can come out of using a Ouija board. But because it was so new, no one really knew the ins and outs of like how you should play the game or what questions you shouldn't ask. So my grandpa actually decided to leave the party at the point that his friends had brought out the Ouija board to start playing with it, because he felt like it had something evil connected to it, and he did not feel like you should be messing around with like spirits or trying to talk to them or anything like that. So the fact that it was a spirit board was enough for my grandpa to leave the party early, because he didn't want to participate in what they were doing. He didn't want to ask any spirits any questions. After my grandpa left the party, the story is told that his four friends had all kind of started just asking some random questions. And one of the questions that came up was if they were going to die soon. And the answer was yes. So then, after asking that question and receiving yes, they wanted to know how they were going to die. And the answers came back that one of them was going to die from a car, the other one was going to die from asphyxiation, and another from strangulation. So those are some pretty scary answers, but as teenagers, they kind of played it off like one of the friends was manipulating the hands to move to give them these answers. So they didn't think much of it. But The terrifying part of the story is that 3 of these 4 teenagers died within months of playing with this Ouija board in the way that they were told they were going to die. So, this is my grandpa's story that he told us because growing up in the area that we were in, there was a scary story about Reggie. And the story kind of goes that Reggie died in his car. And if you go to Reggie's grave, my gosh, I have cold chills just talking about this right now. If you go to Reggie's grave and you say, Reggie, Reggie, how'd you die 3 times at his grave, then you will see car lights flash at his tombstone. And so that was kind of like the scary story when my mom was in high school. That's kind of what the kids in high school were doing, is they were going and finding Reggie's grave, and they were doing this to try and get the headlights to turn on at his grave. And so that's just something scary that I always grew up with. That's why I've never played with a Ouija board, and I never want to, because of the story that my grandpa told. The reason that only 3 of the 4 that had played with the Ouija board ended up passing away in the way that the board explained that they were going to is because after some of the friends started to pass away in these freak accidents, the 4th teenager decided to go and get a religious blessing, and he was able to kind of overcome what the Ouija board told him was going to happen through this religious blessing. Unfortunately, my grandpa has passed away just recently within the last year, so I can't have him come on and share the story, but he was really passionate about not messing with Ouija boards, and that's really been ingrained in me. And so I don't mess in that stuff. I don't like it. If you get close to me, I try to warn you so that you don't. I don't want that, bad energy from Ouija boards coming around me at all. I don't appreciate them. I actually avoided even stepping close to or coming in contact with the Ouija boards that were displayed at the Haunted Museum when I went to the Haunted Museum in Vegas. So I don't like Ouija boards, and I fully feel like it's due to my grandpa's story. So whether this story is true or whether this was his, fictional tale to keep us away from playing with the Ouija boards, it's definitely worked for my entire family. None of us have ever played with one, and we take it very seriously. Well, you guys, those are the stories that I have for you today. If you've heard of any of these stories or you've heard a different kind of version of these stories, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed these stories and it gave you your little Friday night spook. But that's all from me for this video. Thank you guys again. I hope you guys have a fun weekend. Stay protected out there, you guys, but stay spooky. Bye.